Welcome to Gambling with an Edge with your hosts Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin. Bob Dancer is America's premier video poker writer and teacher. He's written 10 books, including Video Poker for the Intelligent Beginner and the best-selling $1 Million Video Poker. He helped develop the computer software Video Poker for Winners, and in 2004 he was inducted into the Video Poker Hall of Fame. Richard Munchkin has been a professional advantage player for over 30 years and is in the Blackjack Hall of Fame. His book, Gambling Wizards, Conversations with the World's Greatest Gamblers, is a testament to the many ways you can succeed at gambling. The goal of the show is that you'll be a more knowledgeable gambler tomorrow than you were yesterday. And now, here are Bob and Richard.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest tonight is Dr. Olaf Vancura, who has recently released an updated version of his classic knockout Blackjack. We'll be talking to Professor Vancura in a few minutes. We received an email at gamblingwithanedge@gmail.com on Blackjack. I'm going to let Richard address it. If Professor Vancura has any comments on it, we'd love to hear them. Now, here's the question. If using the high-low count in Blackjack, would it make the count more accurate if he added +1 if spotting a pair of 5s, 7s, or 5 and a 7? Same go for subtracting 1 for a pair of deuces, 9s, or 2-9. This is instead of learning the full halves count. Richard.
I don't know why you would be subtracting if you saw a pair of deuces, but my general feeling about this type of thing is I'm one of the believers in simpler is better, which is why I had never read Knockout before, but after reading it now, for someone who is just wants to learn about card counting, it is now the book I would recommend. I used to recommend Black Belt and Blackjack, which is a really good book also. But to me, card counting, the more complicated you make it, the more chances you have of making mistakes. And if you want to learn a more complicated count, then go ahead and do it, but don't try to half-ass do it, you know. But to me...
Well, it's a half count, so half-ass
there you go.
Seems appropriate.
To me, you know, in counting cards, the money is in how much you spread your bet and how deep the penetration is and how many hands you get per hour. It is not in making fancy index plays, and keeping side counts. That is not where the money is. So my answer would be no, do not bother with trying to keep track of those extra cards and just, you know. Oh, and here's my other rule of simplicity for people who are at that stage, and that is, when in doubt, like if you're trying to divide the true count, when in doubt, bet more, and when in doubt, play closer to basic strategy. So, you know, if you, in other words,
I'm in doubt all the time. I'm going to shove.
You don't have to divide by quarter decks or any of that. You know, if you just round to the nearest whole deck for your true count, if you're using a true count, then round up for the betting and down for the change in strategy. That's
all right. So Professor Vancura just gave me a look that I think means Richard handled it well. Let's move on to something else.
Yeah, I in general, I concur with what Richard just said. I think keep it simple is usually the best option. There are other considerations, macro considerations like penetration, the bet spread you're able to get away with, stuff like that matter much, much more than these little nuanced things like, trying to make a correction for every little card you see or do a true count conversion to the nearest quarter deck, things like that. So keep it simple.
All right. Now, on a personal note, I wasn't sure I was going to be here today. A few weeks ago, I received a postcard summons to report for jury duty, effective yesterday, March 7th. I did not wish to serve. I wanted to see Professor Vancura today, and I have a video poker class to do tomorrow. Now, if they had a 3-day or less trial starting Thursday, I would be willing to do my duty. But starting yesterday, I was going to do everything I could to get off. I have a personal belief that if anybody calls himself an AP and can't figure out how to get out of jury duty, he's not really an AP. So I marshaled my arguments, prepared documentation to show the judge, and was ready. The day before the appearance, Sunday, as instructed, I logged into the website and was told that I wasn't needed and was excused from serving for at least the next 18 months. Mission accomplished without me doing anything. As we all know, getting lucky is a useful part of being an AP. Let's talk to our guest. Olaf Vancura received his PhD in physics from Johns Hopkins University. He subsequently joined the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics and for several years taught the casino gaming curriculum at Tufts University. After working for several years for Micon and American Gaming System, he currently is CEO of Free Slot Games of Las Vegas, developing social gaming apps. Olaf Vancura, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
The knockout blackjack system has been in print for about 20 years. Many of our listeners are blackjack players and are familiar with the count in general. We will assume for now that all listeners are generally familiar with why you count cards of blackjack, but some may not know the differences between the various counting systems. So, please start off by spending 5 minutes or so telling us what makes the KO count different from other counts and why should players learn this one instead of another count?
That's a good question, Bob.
Thank you.
And I would say, first of all, that the KO system that Ken Fuchs and I put together is really an amalgamation of a lot of work of predecessors, beginning with Dr. Ed Thorpe, who's really the grandfather of card counting and really was the first to show and demonstrate not only theoretically that card counting works, but also on a practical basis presented several counts that you could utilize in a casino environment. But there have been a number of other researchers into card counting that have furthered the method and furthered what we understand about card counting, and I would not do it justice here off the top of my head just mentioning all the names, but hopefully we've mentioned most of them or all of them in the KO book, because really KO is really sits on top of a lot of other research. But some of the unique aspects of KO are, first of all, it's an unbalanced count, and there are other unbalanced counts, but I think the knockout system is the strongest of them. And this has been shown by not only our sims, but independent sims as well that have come out since the book has come out. So what an unbalanced count gives you is, Richard was just talking about the question that was emailed in about balanced counts and true count conversion. Normally in a card counting system, there are a number of steps that take place. You're looking at cards as they exit the pack, either a deck or a shoe, and you're adjusting what's called a running count based on the cards that you see. And then prior to making a bet, and often prior to making a strategic decision as well, if you wish, you need to estimate how many decks remain to be played. Take your running count, which is the count you've got in your head, divide by that running count, basically round off towards zero. Use that value to either determine how much you're going to bet or how you're going to play the hand. And it's a lot of mental gymnastics. It's a lot of work to do in a casino environment where there's a lot of other stuff going on. And, the rhythm of the game, the rhythm of blackjack generally dictates that you need to generally make a decision kind of in concert with the flow of the game. Otherwise, you tend to slow it down and draw attention to yourself that you don't want. So where KO differs is it's unbalanced. So really all you're doing is... You
might want to explain what unbalanced means.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Richard. I appreciate that. Unbalanced means basically if you count through a deck, there's a card tag assigned to each rank. So in the KO system, 2 through 7 are +1, 10s and aces are -1. And what unbalanced means is that if you count through an entire deck starting at 0, you're not going to end up at 0. And in the KO system, you actually end up at +4 per deck. And that's what makes it unbalanced per se. And the unbalanced nature of KO allows you to simply keep that running count. That's the only count you need to keep. You don't need to estimate how many decks are remaining and the error associated with that. You don't need to do that division in your head and the error associated with that. So there's just one count you're keeping. It's a level 1 count, which is also advantageous, meaning you're only going up and down by 1. There's no side counts in KO, so there are some card counting systems where, because the ace has kind of a chameleon nature where it's kind of acts as a good card for the player in terms of betting, but it's kind of acts as a low card in terms of playing out the hand. Some counts prefer to keep a separate side count of aces, and KO just lumps the aces in with high cards because betting is more important than strategic deviations. So for all of these reasons, KO is basically simpler than much or all of the other card counting systems out there. Then the other things that we did in the system are, we made the strategy deviations. We used, Don Schlesinger's illustrious 18 as kind of the starting point, and came up with our own set of strategy deviations, rounded off those indices to just 3 key values, which are key values that are associated with KO. Basically, the count that you start with, what we call the IRC, the key count at which you first have the advantage, and what we call the pivot point, which is a term that Arnold Snyder coined. And the pivot point is basically the count at which you have very accurate information about what your advantage is, what your expectation is. And at KO, the pivot point is +4, which corresponds to roughly an advantage of 1.5 to 2% over the house, depending on rules. And at a KO running count of +4, for those familiar with true counts, it's very analogous to a true count of +4. And there are algebraic reasons why that's true, discussed in the book. But basically, KO gives you a lot of power, and we've tried to strip away all of the extraneous things in a card counting system that, you might squeeze out another few hundredths of a percent. But, KO is the premise behind KO is how do we make card counting accessible to everyone? So that was really the genesis.
Yeah, it's definitely the simplest count, and I was really surprised how well it performed. So, according to the book, it outperforms the high-low.
Yes, it basically it's neck and neck with high-low. There are some conditions under which it will outperform high-low. There are other conditions under which high-low will outperform KO. That's why I say it's basically neck and neck. For all intents and purposes, they're the same. And part of the reason for that is KO is designed so that the pivot point, the point at which you have outstanding information, even though it's just a running count and you're not normalizing, if you will, by the number of decks remaining, at the pivot point, a running count is as good as an unbalanced count is as good as a balanced count at the pivot point. And, KO is chosen, the card tags are chosen so that the pivot point is, +4, which is a healthy advantage for the player. It's an advantage at which you'd like to have a big bet out anyway. So that's when you want to have the most accurate information, when most is at stake, and not only is most at stake because you have the big bet out, but you have accurate information that, it's okay to put the big bet out because you have accurate information about what the expectation is. The other thing, Richard, to your point about why it can perform as well as high-low, really the only difference for a KO player versus high-low in terms of the card tags is what you do with the 7. And in high-low, a 7 is 0, like 8 and 9 are. And in KO, a 7 is +1, like 2 through 6 are. And if you basically look at the card tags as a vector, +1, +1, +1, +1, +1, so on and so forth, 0, 0, -1, and then you look at that vector and you basically look at the what's called the correlation between that vector and the actual effects of removal vector. This is a little bit perhaps more than you wanted. Sorry.
No, that's all right.
That's what we get for having an astrophysicist on the show.
To make a long story short, you want those vectors to be really closely aligned. And the closer they are to basically the angle between them being 0, or the cosine of that angle being 1, that's that correlation. The closer it is to 1, the more accurate your card tags are. KO has outstandingly accurate card tags. I believe it's actually a little bit higher than high-low, which is part of what gives it a little bit of a leg up to begin with. And then
that part made sense to me, right?
Yeah.
Because, it makes sense that you would want to count sevens as positive,
Right.
which is better than the high-low. What surprised me was that the not adjusting for a true count didn't really make up that much in the high-low. And I know I've seen online people, I guess there are some people who play KO with some version of adjusting for a true count.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been fortunate, Ken and I, that when this book came out, there was an initial a lot of interest in it, and kind of the why question. Why is it performing so well? How is that possible versus a balanced count? Because prior to this book coming out, like I said, there were unbalanced counts, but they generally underperformed the balanced counts. And the prevailing wisdom is that a balanced count theoretically should be more accurate. True. But on the other hand, KO tends to have better card tags. Like I said, that the correlation is stronger on KO, so it kind of starts out a little bit ahead. And then, as you just said, Richard, it's true that we give up a little bit being unbalanced. It's true. As you move away from the pivot, we become more inexact. But, you tend to have small bets out when you move away from the pivot to the downside, when you have a negative count. And if you're exceedingly high above the pivot, you tend to just have your max bet out anyway. You can never really continue to increase the bet with the advantage. There comes, in any practical setting, there's a bet spread, and you're trying to get to that max bet when you have a healthy advantage, and you really can't do much better than that. And so I think for those reasons, that's why KO performs as well as it does. And so initially, when the book came out, there was quite a bit of interest in trying to understand why it does as well as it does. But as you just alluded to, since that time, others have kind of taken the KO system, and there were really a couple of different systems presented in the original book. There was what we call the rookie, which you just use counting to adjust your bet, and you basically just jump your bet when you have the advantage. You just identify when you have the advantage and when the house has the advantage. When you have the advantage, you bet more. It's as simple as that. Play basic strategy for any playing decisions. That's what we call the rookie. That's enough to give you an advantage over the house. And then one of the things we recommend in the book is what we call the KO preferred. And you're right, there have been others that, for example, one of the ones I've seen online that discussed a lot is RICO, ridiculously easy KO. And, people have kind of just massaged this system and customized this system to whatever suits them the best. It's a very flexible system, but the overriding concern when we were putting together this system and writing it up in the book was, how do we make this accessible to everyone? And those that are more sophisticated might want to add on to it, like you said. Obviously we're okay with that.
In this book, you have a intermediate strategy between the rookie and the preferred that you call RAD, R-A-D, and it has an unusual feature to it. Like the rookie system, when the bet goes up, you bet more, and you use the basic strategy, except it's a different basic strategy. And so we're all used to a basic strategy where you have 16 against a 10, you hit it. Well, in the RAD basic strategy, you have 16 against a 10, you don't hit it. And so it looks like you're an idiot. So how come you have a different basic strategy in the intermediate system than you have in the beginner system, the rookie system?
That's an outstanding question.
Thank you again.
Bob. And I appreciate that. When we put the book together years ago, we wanted to make it accessible to everyone. And so at that time, we chose to present the basic strategy as kind of the low level, what we call the rookie system. And, since that time, what we've realized is, there's a way to improve upon that rookie, but make it still, a fixed strategy. And that's one of the keys. And what we call the KO RAD system is basically, as you just said, Bob, the only adjustment is, instead of basic strategy, the book, as everybody knows it, as well as players know it. You can buy the cards for this. The pit personnel know it. We introduce what's called the knockout basic strategy, or COBS. And you might say, well, basic strategy is already optimized. What are you guys doing? And that's kind of the point. Basic strategy is optimized, but there are some assumptions that go into basic strategy. The key one is that you're either flat betting or you're randomly betting. That's one of the key assumptions in basic strategy, so that essentially you ignore your bet when you determine how to play. And you brought up the 16 versus 10, which is one of the prototypical examples. It's basically anyone that's ever played blackjack, that is the worst hand, I think, is 16 versus 10. And it turns out 16 versus 10 is it's a special hand if you were to work out the difference between hitting and standing. And the difference is actually 1%. You're correct. The basic strategy says you should hit that hand. But if you stand, it costs you 1%. That means on a $100 wager, the difference between hitting and standing is $1. It's really that close. And it turns out, actually, if you have a 3-card 16 against a 10, it's correct to stand at that point. That's how close it is in terms of a total dependent basic strategy versus a composition dependent basic strategy. But all this to say, if you're card counting, then actually, even if you want to play a fixed strategy, so the knockout basic strategy is a fixed strategy. You're not making any adjustments based on the count. But it turns out that if you have a big bet out and you're card counting, then obviously there's a lot of high cards left in the remaining to be played. And that in and of itself is sufficient. It's enough to move the needle so that 16 versus 10, if you have a big bet out, you should be standing, just if you're a card counter.
Correct.
If you have a small bet out, you should be hitting for the reasons you just talked about earlier. And it turns out if you do a weighted average of those, so if you're a card counter and you have a big bet out, a certain percent of the time, you got a small bet out a different percent of the time. If you do a weighted average of those, it turns out that 16 versus 10, the true and correct card counter's basic strategy is to actually stand. That's actually correct. You gain an expectation by standing if you want to play a fixed strategy.
And you're varying your bet with the count.
And you have to be varying your bet with the count, absolutely. So there are a number of plays like that are actually borderline plays.
Small number, actually, though.
Yeah, a relatively small number that we've chosen for the book. For the COBS, there's only 7 that we've chosen to include, and basically those were chosen because they're easy to do. 16 versus 10 is a perfect example. It's easy to always stand. It's easy to say something like, 16 versus 10, I'm just going to stand. I don't want to risk it. And always do that. That's okay. Another one is 12 against a 2 or 3. And those that have memorized the basic strategy know that there's, basically when the dealer has a 2 through 6 up, you're generally standing anyway. The only exception is 12 against a 2 or 3. And it turns out that in the COBS, you go ahead and you just stand those anyway. That's actually the correct strategy if you're card counting.
And the ploppies think you're playing right when you do that.
Yeah, and what happens is, it does 2 things. It actually slightly improves your expectation. And when I say slightly, I mean a few hundredths of a percent, maybe up to 0.1%. It's not a huge difference for you as a player, but it improves your expectation. And the second thing it does is it gives you camouflage. So, if you're always standing, if the dealer shows a 2 through 6 and you're always standing on every stiff total, and you make a point of pointing that out, that you always stand on every stiff total, then they're going to think you're not a good basic strategy player, even though you're actually playing a fixed strategy that is superior to the basic strategy because you're a card counter that's varying your bet. So that's what's new in this book in terms of the KO RAD system. It's an interesting set of strategy deviations, and it was first written up. This concept of a card counter's basic strategy was first written up in Blackjack Forum, Arnold Snyder's publication. And what we've done is basically use those same concepts and just pulled away a subset of plays that are unique and beneficial to KO that we think are the best for our players. So,
yeah, and unfortunately, today in Las Vegas, I don't think it'll buy you much in terms of camouflage. They've just they've gotten a little bit too smart, to be fooled.
You have to do it every time, and I believe in my estimation, it would be beneficial to you to also somehow announce that you're doing this every time.
Yeah, the problem is that now when they catch card counters, they're catching them from the eye, and they don't hear what you're saying. And a lot of times they're just using software and they're inputting the size of your bet, and it doesn't really matter. The size of your bets is going to sort of get you picked off, at least in Las Vegas. Now, as you move out of Las Vegas, they get progressively stupider. But yeah.
So California are smarter than New Jersey?
Than Kansas? Or
New
yes.
Jersey?
Well, you get to the other coast, maybe they're pretty tough over there too. But as you move toward the middle of the country.
All right. So now, in your most powerful strategy, the preferred strategy for a double-deck game, you talk about spreading from 1 to 5 units with a ramp of 3. I don't know what the word ramp means. How does a ramp of 3, how is that different from a ramp of 4?
Okay.
Clearly by 1, but...
Yes. Has a steeper slope, no doubt. So basically the ramp, as we use it in the book, is, there's a method of betting where if you have a bankroll and you're playing a game where you have an advantage, there's a method of betting known as Kelly betting, where you're essentially betting proportional to your advantage. And in the real world, there's a min bet. In other words, you can't go to 0, which you'd like to do. In Kelly, you'd like to just not bet at all. I mean, you can back away from the game and do something like wonging, where you only come in where you have the advantage. But and then in the real world, there's also a cap on the high end in terms of the bet spread that you're able to get, let's say. So in between your min and max bet is what we call the ramp. It's a measure of how quickly do you go from your min to your max. And basically the ramp, as we use it, is the ratio of how much you bet divided by what your advantage is at that point in time. So for a single deck KO, for example, where each 1 point in the running count changes your expectation by about 0.9%. So you'd be wanting to change, a ramp of 3 would be 2.7 is how you're changing your bets in terms of the units. But again, our sims in the book we tend to do what we call real world type sims, where, we're not betting 2.76 units because that's what Kelly calls for. We just round off to 3 or round off to some real world condition. But that's what the ramp is. It's how quickly you're changing from your min to your max bet. And it's a function of what you know or estimate your advantage to be at that time. So there are various ramps that we propose in the book as a function of game.
On a double-deck game where you have a 1 to 5 spread, it sounds like you would only have 3 different bets: your minimum bet, a 3-unit bet, and a 5-unit bet.
I would defer to what we have in the book. I mean, it's possible we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because in a 2-deck game, the change in expectation per point in running count is different. It's not 0.9. I believe it's around 0.6%, and that's one of the unique features of a running count is that it's there's no conversion to a true count, so you're not normalizing, and so things are slightly different in 1 deck and 2 decks. So
yeah.
All right. You've worked at the vice presidential level or higher at 3 different companies, 2 or 3 that make slot machines.
I thought he was running for vice president for a second.
No, he
it is that time of year.
Yeah.
To be qualified for president, you have to talk about how long your organ is these days.
Yeah,
and so I just, so far he hasn't mentioned that. So I don't know that he's qualified. So now, according to Anthony Curtis, friend of the show, publisher of Huntington Press, you're writing a killer book about slot machines. So what kind of information will be in that book? Do you have any idea when it'll be released?
I'm going to defer to Anthony. I believe it'll be released later this year. And yeah, I am working on it. The working title is called Slot Myths. And it's a book I've wanted to write for several years. The premise is that, there are a lot of superstitions and myths and cockamamie betting systems and just a lot of garbage associated with gambling that, frankly, I don't care for. And, me being on the manufacturing side, having designed slot machines through my career and understanding not only on mathematically how they function, but from an engineering perspective, what's really inside a slot machine? What really is an RNG? How do they really work? Do they have a cycle? Do slot machines have a cycle? Do they have streaks? Are they allowed to keep track of how much you've won and lost? Those kinds of things. So this book is really a kind of it's written from a player's perspective, like KO is. The idea is essentially to make the inner workings of slot machines accessible to everyone, and in so doing, give them a little bit of color in terms of how are slot machines designed. It's the cliche is true. It's a marriage of art and science, but what goes into the thinking of how you design a slot machine, the methods of play, everything. The artwork, the sounds, the choreography. How do you generate suspense and anticipation, and how do you ensure that the machine will hold what it's designed to hold? And so it's a marriage of art and science there, but there's another vantage point that a lot of people don't realize, and we all do here sitting in this room, is that real money gambling is I like to say it's a highly regulated industry, and I cannot emphasize that enough. To even put a slot machine out, the company that manufactures the slot machine, that company needs to be licensed. All of the officers in that company need to be licensed. The gaming equipment needs to be licensed or approved, and the actual software that runs the particular title you're interested in needs to be approved. And it's a very arduous process, and there are rules and regulations that we have to live by before we can put a slot machine out. And those rules and regulations are designed to protect everyone. They're designed to protect the house, they're designed to protect the player, and they're designed to protect the manufacturer. And so it's a whole nother perspective that a lot of players don't realize is out there. And there are certain things we are allowed to do as slot designers, and there are other things that are just forbidden, frankly, and we just can't go there. And so this book is going to be kind of a survey of slots generally, how they work, how they don't work, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. And then we're going to touch on a number of truths and myths about slots. We're going to touch on ways that people have beaten slots, not just video poker, which is, a way obviously that through strategy and through, judicious, wise play, you can get an advantage in video poker. But there are ways that machines have gone out where they've just had flaws in them, and they've been beaten, frankly. And and players often don't realize, that there are human beings on the other side of this that are coding these, and we all make mistakes. And it's fascinating to me just how human nature is. You see something and you decide, hey, something's not right here. What's going on? And you go home and you noodle on it and you figure it out and you come back and you beat it sometimes. And so I think. Anyway, so it's a tour of slot machines and how they work, how they don't work, the truths and the myths behind them.
Well, since you're still writing it, maybe let's talk about some ideas that if they're not in there now, maybe you might want to address. But,
sure.
So, well, first a question. Is it legal to, let's say you have a slot machine that has 3 virtual reels and 777 is your big jackpot. Are you allowed to make the last reel dependent on what the first reels have shown? So, for example, are you allowed to say, let 7-7 show up and change the frequency of a third 7 on the last reel based on whether 2 7s have already appeared?
Short answer is no. That's not allowed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now my next question is, in the old days when you wanted to attack a progressive, when they were mechanical machines, you can sit down and actually map the reels, right? You say, well, there's an orange followed by a bell followed by a cherry, and then you can kind of look at the next spin and see, oh, here's a bell followed by a cherry followed by a banana, and you can work out each reel has 22 stops, and this is what the reel looks like. Can that be done with virtual reels?
No. Short answer, no.
Okay, so if you wanted to know...
Bob, I hope you appreciate my short answers.
Yeah.
I do, because I got these questions I'm dying to answer, and I want you to hurry up and finish
All right,
it.
one more, and then I'll let you go on, Bob. So, if I wanted to find out if the chance of that 777 coming up to hit that progressive jackpot, is the only way I can do that to gather tens of thousands of spins and see how often the 7 appears on each reel?
That is the way you would have to approach it if you wanted to approximate what the odds were.
And is it possible for it to be different on each reel?
But it's a little more complicated than that. Yes, it is very possible and commonly done to make the odds different on every reel.
Okay.
And it is also very commonly done to put more than one 7 on each reel, and the odds of each of those 7s can be different.
Oh, wow.
So it's a little more complicated than what you have
so you
said.
need more than tens of thousands of spins.
That's why I say you might be able to start to estimate it. But it depends on the value of the progressives. But progressives these days can, easily go into the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, megabucks, tens of millions. So obviously the odds are correspondingly much higher. And, it is difficult. It's small numbers of statistics. It's difficult to extrapolate out because the error bars tend to be high. It's difficult to multiply 3 numbers together and carry along their error bars to try to get a reasonable estimate of what the answer is. So theoretically it could be done, and I think that because the actual math behind a game is a trade secret, and I don't know what IGT does in game X, just like they don't know what I've done in game Y. It's just the nature of the way slot machines are. And unlike video poker, video poker is bound by a reg. We talked about regs earlier. Video poker is bound by a reg that because you're dealing a poker game with a 52-card deck, the odds of each card need to resemble what they are in the live version of that game. Because video poker is considered to be if you will, an electronic representation of a live game. It must function like the live game. That's a reg that governs video poker. So
at least a reg in Nevada. That reg is not in place in New York casinos or in state of Washington, among other places.
Yeah, and when I say the reg here, I'm specifically referring to Nevada Reg 14, which governs randomness and things like that. And there may be one or more other Nevada regs that govern what I'm specifically video poker side, but Reg 14 is the main Nevada reg that governs randomness. Let me put it that way. I'm not sure if Reg 14 is video poker centric, but slots are different. Slots do not have an analogous game live in the casino, and so slot reels, more or less, designers can do what they want with those reels. And Richard alluded to virtual reels earlier, and a lot of people, when they say virtual reels, they're like, what is that? Well, this book will explain what a virtual reel is and why they're valuable to slot manufacturing companies. But the nuts and bolts of it is, if I walk up to a video poker machine here in Nevada, or any of the other jurisdictions that more or less use Nevada regs, and most of them do. I will grant you there are some exceptions. A pay table is all I need on a video poker machine for me to go home and calculate what the hold percentage must be.
On most machines, yes.
Yeah, slot machine, very different. I can have 2 identical machines, identical reel strips. Everything looks identical to me, identical pay tables. Everything looks identical to me as far as the naked eye can see. And they can have very different hold percentages.
Yes.
One might be 2%, the other one might be literally 20%. So it's a very different game.
Now, slot machines in general are played for entertainment purposes, and slot players, as a general rule, accept the casino's going to win in the long run. That's just the nature of the game. This show, as a general rule, doesn't like that general rule and looks for ways at which players can gain the advantage over machines, be it video poker, slots, or anything else. In your book, will there be information for players like that who are looking for an actual edge that they can use while gambling?
Yeah, there will be, and I think your point, Bob, is well taken. That slot players tend to be it's the 2 E's, is what I like to say: entertainment and escape. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for time on device. Their philosophy is, hey, I'm going to go to the casino anyway. I'm going to go out anyway. I can spend, I don't know, $40 on dinner and a movie, or I can spend $40 at a casino
And get free drinks.
And I, when I first joined MyCon years ago, I was fortunate enough to be involved in a large number of focus groups, dozens of focus groups. They were trying to get me up to speed quickly on, how to design slots and how to think about how players think about slots. And that's really what a lot of the design process is you've got to place yourself in another context. And I was surprised, but basically what you just said, Bob, really summarizes, dozens of focus groups. Slot players, they're not dumb at all. They expect to lose. They're okay with losing. We heard that again and again and again. They're okay with it.
And many are dumb.
Well, but they want entertainment, and so it's really a form of entertainment for them.
And they want the other thing that you mentioned: time on device.
Time on device.
They don't want to be busted in 20 minutes.
Right. And that's part of what goes into the design of slots. There's many. I mean, you can think of lotteries have a house advantage as well, but they're designed very differently than slots are. Keno has a big house advantage, very different than slots. And slot design, it's a curious thing because you want players to be entertained and enjoy themselves while losing. That's really the crux of it. And it's not easy to do that. And, slots today typically have a house edge of about 10%. And 10% is a lot. I mean, we talk about in blackjack card counting, maybe getting about a 1% advantage as players. So slot players are giving up a lot. And the analogous game, a very simplified, dumb game would be flip a coin. I bet $1, flip a coin, and if it's heads, I win 80 cents, and if it's tails, I lose the $1. Every 2 plays, I wager $2 and I lose 20 cents. That's a 10% house edge. That's what a typical slot is. It's that much. It's a lot. And to make that entertaining for players that they want to play and they want to spend hundreds of spins per hour wagering on this.
You got to put naked girls on those coins.
Well, and so that's double roulette and way faster than,
it's way faster, yeah. It's I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of brands in slots, Ripley's Believe It or Not, Yahtzee, Garfield, Battleship, And I remember explaining, as I explained to people, Hasbro, when they want to sell a Yahtzee game, they just need to sell 1 per house, basically. That's kind of what they're shooting for. They might theme it to be Disney or something and sell 2 per house. But Yahtzee slots, very different proposition. I mean, you've got to resell that game thousands of times to a typical player. Each time that player wagers $1, in essence, it costs them 10 cents. They're spending 10 cents, more or less. So you've got to resell that game thousands of times. So slot machine design is a very interesting, unique field. And that's some of the things I'll touch upon in the book. But yeah, we will discuss ways that you can take advantage or advantage play in slots. Obviously, they're not as prevalent as something like blackjack, where if you find decent rules, you can sit down and with proper strategy, you can beat it right there. So,
very good. We're talking to Olaf Vancura. We have a few more questions for him after our commercial break. South Point has more than 10,000 games, returning more than 99%. This is more than anybody else has. The big promotion this month is called the $600,000 March Money Madness. At all times, there is a casino-wide progressive with a value that grows from a reset of $10,000 to whenever it is hit, which must be by $25,000. One lucky player gets the prize, and everybody else with a player card inserted when it goes off gets $25 in free play. As soon as the jackpot is hit, another progressive begins at $10,000. This cycle will continue until 3 a.m. April Fool's Day. An additional minor progressive is always running between $1,000 and $2,500. This progressive is likely to go off 3 times a day. Double points are on Thursday, March 17th, if you're wearing green, or even if you're not. Free video poker class this week is Advanced 8-5 Bonus Poker. Bonus Poker is a 99.2% game. Advanced 99.2% game is an oxymoron, according to some players. Many casinos in this town, 8-5 bonus is as good as it gets. And there are at least 2 that I play at where with the slot club and the mailers and blah, 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 I have the advantage. So trying to learn every last play squeezes as much of the advantage as I can. Everybody's welcome if you're 21, but if you don't know jacks or better or bonus poker at least the intermediate level, this class will be tougher than what you bargained for. At the Palms, from now until the end of April, they have drawings every Friday and Saturday night, 7:15. Must be present to win. 5 winners. Total prize pool of $5,000. Top prize $2,500. And each of those 5 players gets a chance to win $1 million on a match game. It's merely 16,504 to 1 against you, but you can do it. PFP, play for prizes until March 18th. You earn Albertsons gift cards. Albertson is a supermarket in this part of the country. Cards are redeemed at a rate of 0.2% up to $190 a day. You keep your points. For the following 2 weeks, you can earn cash at the same rate. There are 2 multiplier days on Wednesdays, March 16th and March 30th. Video poker players receive a maximum of 2x, a minimum and a maximum of 2x. And the maximum bonus award is 40,000 points, which is $100 of free play. These 2 multiplier days earn the PFP along with it. So when you're playing at cash, it actually makes it a 0.45 slot club rather than the normal 0.20. At videopoker.com, it's the best place to play lots of games. If you sign up for the gold membership, $8.95 a month or $79.95 a year, this allows you to get corrections on most games. Game of the week is Double Super Times Pay. This is a 7 coins per line game where you randomly, 1 in 15, you get a multiplier between 1x and 2x, 1x and 10x on the deal, and separately another random multiplier, 1 in 15 chance, on the draw. If you receive 2 multipliers, they're added together. Both multipliers average a little over 4x. There is a once in a blue moon opportunity in this game. If you get Delta Royal, which is 1 in 650,000 chance, round numbers, and you connect on the 1 in 15 multiplier on the deal, that multiplier is always 20x. So playing $10 play at $70 a pull, one of these Delt Royals with a multiplier is worth $800,000. That's more than Richard and I together have earned all week. It only happens once every 9.75 million hands, but dreaming about it is a lot of fun. The game adds about 0.5% to the base game, and no adjustments to your strategy are necessary.
I'd just like to be there to watch them puke when it happened.
Watch the casino puke.
Yes.
There are a lot of games where if a machine gives the maximum jackpot, the casino managers get rid of that son of a gun right away.
Yeah, right.
And over time, I mean, once in 9.75 million, but if it happens the first week.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are slot machines, though, where the manufacturer takes that risk, has insurance, basically, for,
right.
Like Megabucks is, it's not the casino that pays that off, it's IGT. So
they pay it off over 20 years. I mean,
there's an option for that, and there's an immediate option based on the interest rate and other factors.
Oh, there is. I didn't
Yes.
think there was for Megabucks.
I think there is.
Oh.
Okay. So we're talking to Olaf Vancura,
who's shrugging his shoulders. He knows nothing about megabucks.
So we talked about his book on knockout blackjack, and he's also designed a lot of slot machines. Now, some of those slot machines have a knowledge element, such as Ripley's or Clue, where smart players can do better at the game than not so smart players. Is it possible that somebody with perfect answers to all the questions and an expert statistician can actually gain an edge on those machines?
What do you think?
No. I'm sure that the question is how much better can they do than the average moron.
You're bad. You're a bad boy. That's really a design choice. How much better they can do, and it's a design choice.
You mean there are various settings? It can be.
Yeah, each game is designed differently. Let me put it this way: it needs to be enough so that you want to learn the answers and come back. So there's incentive in that you feel good, you feel smart about it. But it has to be not enough so that the house is upset over the hold. Now those games have an interesting characteristic anyway. It's what we call knowledge-based games, and it's different than strategy. A knowledge-based game, if you know the answer, you will for sure get your desired result. If I'm supposed to double 11 against a 6, but I may not get my desired result, even though that's the correct strategy. But in a knowledge-based game, it's kind of like you're playing with fire, because if you know the answer, we got to pay you what we say we're going to pay you. So, but the short answer is, yeah, we tend to design these things so that there's just like in video poker, there's a few percent or more difference between the players that are guessing at everything and others that might know some of the answers.
So they can get it so they only lose 8% if they're really smart at the game.
Well, I noticed at G2E with the new skill-based games they had there that the difference would be the best players might hold 96 and return 96, and the bad players it would return 98.
Oh no, there were the pinball games were actually set so that you could have an over 100% advantage.
Only at G2E though.
That's true. There is but good. But yeah, that's a physical skill, and the other's a knowledge skill. So they're both knowledge based, but they're a little bit different.
Anyway, we welcome your questions. You can send them to us at gamblingwithanedge@gmail.com or facebook.com/gamblingwithanedge, or you can tweet them at us at RWM21. You can get the show delivered to you automatically every week while you're sleeping at iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or at my site, richardmunchkin.com. For an archive of every episode ever done, you can find that at bobdancer.com.
All right. So I really enjoyed it today, Professor Vancura. I especially like that you laughed at most of my jokes. I thought that was really charming. Hope to have you back again. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, guys, for having me.
Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good day.
You've been listening to Gambling with an Edge with your hosts Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin. Subscribe to the show in iTunes, and episodes will be delivered to you automatically every week. Archived versions of past shows may be found at bobdancer.com and richardmunchkin.com. We welcome emails at gamblingwithanedge@gmail.com. Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin are both available on Facebook and welcome your questions. The sponsors for the show are the South Point Hotel, Casino and Spa, the M Resort, the Palms Casino Resort, and the website videopoker.com. Join us again next week for another Gambling with an Edge.
Views and opinions expressed on this program were those of the hosts and guests and did not necessarily reflect those of Vegas All Net Radio, its affiliates, or its parent company.